Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Pippa heard Estella's sobs as soon as she entered the classroom. She quickly looked over only to see the little girl crying her heart out with a tearful face. "What's wrong, Essie?" Pippa hurried to the little girl's side. Estella simply continued crying without saying a word. Beside her, Yoel obediently stood up and explained the situation to Pippa. "Ms. Ward, when class was over, I wanted to invite Estella to play, but I seemed to have scared her." Soon, someone could not stand it and spoke up for Yoel. It was Estella who hit Yoel first, but she ended up crying herself. Pippa listened to the children's words, and understanding dawned upon her. Having been Estella's teacher for such a long time, she naturally was aware of the girl's condition. Moreover, she had also noticed Estella's gloomy mood for the past 2 days. It should be as Yoel said. He scared Essie, so she hit him. At that thought, Pippa looked at Yoel with concern. "Where did Estella hit you? Are you okay? Let me have a look." The boy stretched out his hand obediently. "She just hit the back of my hand. It doesn't hurt anymore." Pippa looked over him, and after confirming that he was fine, she finally felt at ease. "I apologize to you on Essie's behalf." Yoel nodded indifferently before looking at Estella with concern. "But she's still crying." Pippa was equally worried. She lifted Estella, stood up, and said to the other students, "I'll take Essie out for a while. Another teacher will come to watch you. Be good." When the children agreed in unison, Pippa walked out of the classroom with Estella in her arms. "Essie, I'll give your daddy a call, okay?" Estella was not in a good state, and Pippa had no choice but to treat it seriously. However, as soon as she spoke, she saw Estella shaking her head vigorously. That left Pippa in a dilemma. If I were to go against Essie's wishes at this moment, I'm afraid her situation would worsen. But if I don't get Mr. Farwell to come over, I also don't know what to do with her. "Then tell me why you're crying, okay?" she said patiently, trying her best to calm the little girl down. Estella choked out 2 words, Archie, Benny. Pippa's heart softened as she instantly understood what the girl meant. Archie and Benny didn't come to school for the past 2 days, and she's feeling sad. After knowing the reason Estella was crying, Pippa let out a sigh of relief and explained, "Benny is not feeling well these past 2 days, so he was excused from school. He will come after he has recovered." When she heard that, Estella's sobs reduced to sniffles, and she looked at her teacher with distrust on her teary face. Seeing that Estella truly reacted because of this matter, Pippa felt relieved as she soothingly stroked the little girl's head. "I know that you like Archie and Benny, but the other children in the class are also very nice. Since those 2 are absent these 2 days, you can get to know the other children in the class better, Essie." Estella's eyebrows angled upward, forming an inverted V as she shook her head in refusal. "I don't want to get to know the other kids. I only want Archie and Benny. Ms. Ward says that Benny is sick." The little girl did not know if she could believe it, but she could not help worrying. She tried her best to hold back her tears and ran back to the classroom to get a pen and paper. Seeing this, Pippa stared at her in puzzlement. Estella held her book and wrote each letter carefully. When she was done, she lifted it to show Pippa. She wrote, "Ms. Ward, I also want to be excused from school." The little girl looked at Pippa with a serious expression. Pippa had roughly guessed Estella's intention, but she still asked, "Are you going to see Archie and Benny?" Estella nodded vigorously. Pippa frowned and thought for a while. "I can grant you leave from school, but you have to tell your daddy and let him take you there." Estella's expression fell again when she heard that. She shook her head stubbornly and wrote in the notebook, "No, Daddy." Seeing the big exclamation mark at the back, Pippa could not help but feel troubled. Estella's situation was special in the first place. During the previous parent-child event, the little girl got lost, which scared Pippa a lot and made her even more concerned about the girl. Normally in such situations, Pippa should get Estella's parents to come over to take her there. She even had to hand over the little girl to her father in person. However, for some reason Essie displays such aversion toward her daddy. When she did not get a reply from Pippa after a long time, Estella pouted again, and her eyes were red. She wished to visit Archie and Benny, but she knew that if her father went with her, Roxanne and the two boys would not be happy. Pippa noticed that the little girl was about to cry again. In the spur of a moment she could only say, "I'll take you there, okay?" Estella's eyes lit up again as she nodded vigorously. As soon as Pippa finished speaking, she regretted it. If something were to happen along the way, I couldn't bear such a responsibility. But I'm defenseless against her pitiful expression. In the end, Pippa still drove the little girl to Roxanne's house in person. Roxanne had left her home address during the kindergarten registration. However, as it was Pippa's first time going there, she almost took a detour on the way. It was Estella who showed her the way. Pippa was somewhat surprised. She did not expect that the little girl had been to Roxanne's house so many times that she had even remembered the way. By the time the two arrived at Roxanne's house, it was close to noon. Pippa led the little girl to ring the doorbell. Roxanne had been accompanying the boys at home for the past 2 days. Upon hearing the doorbell ring, she immediately went to open the door. The second she saw the people at the door, she was stunned. Pippa gave Roxanne an awkward smile. "Sorry for the abrupt visit, Miss Jarvis." Roxanne slowly looked away from the little girl she was holding, turned sideways to let them in, and went to pour Pippa some coffee. "Is there any particular reason for your visit, Miss Ward?" Roxanne placed the cup down and sat down on the couch beside her. Upon hearing that Pippa had come, Archie and Benny ran over to greet her before shifting their gazes to Estella beside her. There were still tear marks on the little girl's face, but when she saw the boys looking at her, she still gave them a sweet smile. Archie and Benny, however, were worried, wondering if Estella got bullied in kindergarten. Pippa glanced at the boys before asking in concern, "2 days ago you told me that Benny was sick." "Essie was worried, so I sent her here and also came to see Benny." "How is he?" Hearing that, Roxanne looked at Estella with mixed emotions and explained to Pippa, "He's feeling much better, but I'm still worried, so I told him to rest at home for 2 more days. He'll go back to kindergarten in the next 2 days." After asking a few more questions out of concern, Pippa checked the time and appeared troubled. Although she agreed to excuse Estella from school, she did not take any leave, and it was not good to stay outside for too long. "Since you've visited Archie and Benny, Essie, let's go back," Pippa asked the little girl for her opinion. However, Estella stared at Roxanne and the boys, pursed her lips, and shook her head. Seeing Estella's reaction, Pippa knew it would not be easy for her to take the little girl back that day. Not knowing what to do, she could only shoot Roxanne a beseeching look. Roxanne smiled at her. "Let Essie stay. I'll send her home later. You can go off first." Hearing those words, Pippa sighed with relief and got up to say goodbye. Roxanne and the children saw Pippa out before returning to the living room. Estella clutched the woman's hand tightly the entire time and did not want to let go even though her hand was sweating. Although Roxanne's heart softened at the sight, she had to force herself to be firm. The reason why she told Pippa to let Estella stay was that she knew the little girl would not leave easily. Secondly, she also had something to say to the girl. Roxanne crouched down, looked into Estella's eyes, and was about to speak when suddenly the little girl's stomach growled. "Essie is hungry, Mommy," Benny innocently reminded his mother. Roxanne's eyebrows knitted slightly. However, looking at the innocent and pitiful little face in front of her, the words she intended to speak could not come out. She merely said, "It's lunchtime. Have lunch with us, Essie." Estella bobbed her head obediently. On the way to the restaurant, she also clutched Roxanne's hand tightly while staring intently at Benny beside her, her eyes filled with concern. Benny knew that Estella was worried about him, but he had also noticed that she had not spoken a word ever since entering the house. To try to get her to talk, he pretended to be clueless and quietly sat down at the dining table. Estella could not help but feel a little anxious upon noticing that Benny had clearly met her gaze but still had not spoken to her. Opposite her, Benny deliberately put on a look of discomfort while peeking at Estella from time to time. Anxious, she stammered, Benny. Only then did he slowly meet her gaze. What's the matter? Estella frowned and pointed to his stomach. Not feeling well, she uttered. Hearing her words, Benny smiled and reassured her, I've recovered long ago. Didn't you hear what Mommy said? We're going back to kindergarten in the next 2 days. Only then did Estella feel relieved, nodding obediently with a smile on her face. Benny, on the other hand, could not help but ask, Did you cry just now? Was it because you were worried about me? Upon hearing that, Roxanne and Archie also subconsciously looked over. From the moment the little girl entered the house, they had noticed the tear marks on her face and her reddened eyes but did not ask her about it. Originally, Roxanne intended to explain the situation to Estella, cut off all ties, and simply be ruthless to her to the end. However, she did not expect that there would be such warmth between them. Hearing Benny's question to the little girl, she still could not help but be concerned about Estella. Estella noticed that everyone was looking at her and her smile grew sweeter. She merely thought that Roxanne and the boys were concerned about her, feeling as though she had traveled back to the time when she was living in Roxanne's house. She nodded to them, admitting that she had cried because she was worried about Benny. Upon seeing her nod, Roxanne felt unaccountably heavy-hearted. After lunch, Archie and Benny wanted to play with Estella, but Roxanne promptly stopped them. The two of you can play on your own. I'm going to send Essie back. She had wanted to make things clear to Estella but realized she couldn't bear to utter such harsh words, especially since the little girl had just bawled her eyes out. Thus her only option was to send the kid back first. Despite Archie and Benny's reluctance to part with Estella, they still nodded obediently at their mother. However, now that Estella couldn't play with them, the two boys lost all interest and stood silently beside her and their mother. Estella, on the other hand, was miffed by Roxanne's words. When she felt the latter's gaze on her, she pouted and looked away, refusing to say anything else. Seeing how averse the little girl was to her, Roxanne's heart ached. My goodness, Essie has never given me the cold shoulder before. In all honesty, I'd never have been so cruel to her if I had a choice. How could I when I've been treating her like the daughter I lost? There's nothing I want more than to be with her forever, but what else can I do when her family keeps us from getting close? As she gazed at Estella's delicate profile, Roxanne pulled herself together and gently grabbed the little girl's shoulders. Essie, I'll send you home, okay? The kid, however, pretended not to have heard anything and continued staring at the ground, only to have tears welling up in her eyes again when she blinked. Having noticed the change in Estella's demeanor, Roxanne instantly felt a lump in her throat. A while later, she furrowed her brows and added, I promised Ms. Ward I'll send you back. If you stayed here too long, she'd tell your father and then he'd come looking for me. In other words, she didn't want Lucian to drop by. Upon hearing that, Estella turned back to look at Roxanne. Thinking that the little girl might finally concede, Roxanne was about to breathe a sigh of relief when Estella mumbled, Daddy won't come. Naturally, Roxanne was a little baffled by that comment. It had been a while since Estella held a proper conversation, so she couldn't help but stumble over her words. I won't let Ms. Ward tell Daddy. With that, she carefully approached Roxanne and tugged at the hem of her shirt with a pitiful look. I want to stay with you, Ms. Jarvis. This time around, Roxanne didn't flinch. After all, she had grown accustomed to Estella's little tricks. Alas, by the time she realized what was happening, the latter had already latched onto her. Roxanne's heart instantly melted when she saw how sad and vulnerable the little girl was. For some time, she had tried her best to avoid Lucian and Estella, and even when they met, she made sure to act a lot colder than before. However, with Estella being so sensitive to emotions and the environment, Roxanne was sure she must have realized the physical and emotional distancing she did earlier. I thought that with time Essie would reduce her dependence on me and I'd also stop missing her so much. But who knew the kid would cling to me so stubbornly? No matter how much I try to distance myself, she still refuses to leave my side. Then again, aren't I the same? I haven't seen Essie for so long, yet my heart still softens at the sight of her. After seeing that Roxanne wasn't pushing her away, Estella leaned closer into her arms and mumbled, "Miss Jarvis, I know you don't like Daddy. I won't let Daddy come. Please don't chase me away." Roxanne felt even more conflicted when she heard the tiny, adorable voice in her ear. I knew it. I knew Essie was highly empathic and would have realized I was distancing myself from Lucian. That's why she had visited me the last couple of times without letting him know. Am I truly that important to her? Upon seeing how pitiful Estella was, Archie and Benny couldn't help but put in a good word for her. "Mommy, since Essie came alone, why don't you let her play with us for a bit more?" Benny pleaded as he tugged at Roxanne's sleeve. "Mommy, Mr. Farwell wouldn't come looking for her so soon," Archie chimed in. "Let Essie stay here a little longer." Roxanne stayed silent for quite some time, not knowing what to say. Estella, on the other hand, buried herself in Roxanne's embrace. Afraid that the latter might reject her, she kept her gaze lowered, not daring to make eye contact. Roxanne glanced at her boy's pleading looks before checking the time. It's not even 1 in the afternoon. Lucian should still be working at this hour. Even if he finds out that Essie is with me, I doubt he'd rush here immediately. Besides, this might be the last time I get to be with Essie. With that in mind, Roxanne sighed to herself and finally gave in. "All right. You can stay for a while more," she said as she ruffled Estella's hair. "Go on and play with the boys. I'll send you back later." Archie and Benny's eyes lit up and they immediately invited Estella to a game of Lego. However, the latter merely shook her head and followed Roxanne in silence. "I can feel that Ms. Jarvis isn't treating me the same as before. I didn't even bring Daddy along, yet she still wants to send me away. Does she now hate me like she hates Daddy?" Having been struck by that sudden realization, Estella stopped in her tracks and stared wistfully at Roxanne's back. Roxanne knew the little girl had been following her, so when she heard the footsteps stop, she turned around instinctively. To her surprise, Estella was gazing at her with teary eyes, looking every bit like an innocent, wounded animal. Needless to say, that sight tugged at Roxanne's heartstrings. She, too, stopped and hesitated before walking back to Estella. "What's wrong, Essie?" "You don't like me anymore, Ms. Jarvis," a misty-eyed Estella replied with absolute certainty. Roxanne froze, taken aback by the little girl's answer. Estella looked down dejectedly and added, "You don't like Daddy, so you chased him away. Now you want to chase me away too. You've stopped liking me, Ms. Jarvis." For a moment, Roxanne was at a loss for words. She never thought Estella would draw such a conclusion from everything that had happened. Of course, she still liked the latter. However, if she were to continue spending time with Estella, it'd only increase the chances of bumping into Lucian, who was now nothing but trouble. Even if Roxanne didn't mind, she knew she had to keep Archie and Benny safe. Besides, according to what Sonia had said, it was only a matter of time before Lucian married Aubrey. It wouldn't be appropriate to continue seeing Lucian or Estella then, would it? Yes, I pushed them away, but it wasn't because I disliked them. Then again, if I denied Essie's line of reasoning, wouldn't I also be implying I don't hate Lucian? "Don't dislike me, Ms. Jarvis," Estella pleaded. She was holding onto the corner of Roxanne's shirt and trying to bury herself in Roxanne's embrace. Roxanne turned around and squatted down to let Estella hug her. In a helpless tone, she uttered, "I don't dislike you." "Why are you chasing me away, Ms. Jarvis?" Estella muttered. Roxanne sensed that Estella was about to break down into tears. She hugged Estella and gently touched the corners of her eyes. Estella pursed her lips and stared at Roxanne, waiting for an answer. After a while, Roxanne said, "I'm not sending you back because I don't like you. It's just that we shouldn't be so close." Estella furrowed her brows after hearing those words. She then tilted her head and looked at Roxanne puzzledly. "I like Ms. Jarvis a lot and we've always been this close. Why should things be different now? Is it because of Daddy?" At that thought, Estella grew anxious and she uttered cautiously, "I won't tell Daddy about this. I can come without him knowing." Roxanne was briefly stunned by her words and she was amused at the same time. Roxanne didn't answer, so Estella started to panic. "What else am I supposed to do? I like Ms. Jarvis and I like Daddy as well. However, Ms. Jarvis doesn't like Daddy. I have no choice but to come to see her without Daddy knowing. I can't possibly give up on Daddy, can I? Must I make a choice between Ms. Jarvis and Daddy?" With that thought in mind, Estella burst into tears. "I want Daddy and I want Ms. Jarvis as well." Roxanne's heart broke when she saw Estella crying because those words were like daggers to her heart. Roxanne averted her gaze and avoided looking at Estella when she said, "Be good, okay, Essie? When you get a mommy next time, your mommy will treat you even better than I do." Still crying, Estella shook her head. "No. I don't want a mommy." Estella was crying so hard that her voice cracked. Roxanne glanced at Estella and saw how reddened Estella's face was. She then endured her heartbreak and said, "That's not up to you to decide, okay? Eventually your daddy is going to get married. By then you'll have a mommy. If your mommy sees how close we are, she'll get angry. I don't want that. I don't want that bad woman to be my mommy." Estella cried and screamed at the top of her lungs. Although Roxanne didn't mention any names, Estella knew exactly who Roxanne was referring to. "There's no way I'll accept that evil woman as my mommy. That evil woman is the reason Ms. Jarvis doesn't want me." Estella stamped her feet angrily and yelled, "I hate that woman. I hate that evil woman." Upon hearing that, Roxanne narrowed her eyes. She knew who Estella was referring to, but she didn't know Estella would have such a big reaction. Roxanne then felt pitiful when she recalled how ruthless Aubrey was toward Estella. Sonia and Lucian had already decided to let Aubrey marry into the family. Who am I to say anything about that? All I can do is hope that Aubrey would treat Essie better. While listening to Estella crying, Roxanne couldn't help but wipe the tears off of her face and hug her. She gently patted Estella's back and consoled, "Essie, don't cry, okay? Since you're so cute, I am sure your mommy is going to love you. You have to listen to your daddy and your mommy, okay?" In Roxanne's embrace, Estella was crying her lungs out when she tightened her grip on Roxanne's shirt and uttered, "I want you, Ms. Jarvis. I want you to be my mommy." Roxanne was stunned. Estella then added, "You're the best, Ms. Jarvis. Daddy likes you too." It was then Roxanne returned to her senses and scoffed at herself. Why would Essie come to such a conclusion? Perhaps she thinks when two people interact with each other more often, they're into each other. I think that's why she likes Benny and Archie. No matter how I explain the situation to her, I bet she'll never understand it. She would definitely refuse to acknowledge the fact that Lucian likes Aubrey. With that thought in mind, Roxanne couldn't help but feel a headache coming. A while later, she reached out her hand to wipe the tears off Estella's face and uttered tactfully, "I won't be here forever. I've only returned to the country for work this time around. Once I'm done, I'll have to leave the country again. Hence, I won't be able to be your mommy, Essie." Although she had already tried her best to be tactful, Estella ended up wanting her to stay even more. After she stopped crying for a while, Estella cried even harder because knew she wouldn't be able to see Roxanne anymore once she had left the country. Roxanne was taken aback and she felt a panic rising in her chest. Archie and Benny heard Estella crying, so they quickly rushed to the scene. They looked at Estella worriedly and asked, "Mommy, what happened to Essie?" Roxanne parted her lips but didn't know how to respond to their question. Tears were streaming down Estella's cheeks, and she pleaded in a hoarse voice, "Don't leave, Miss Jarvis." Benny and Archie looked perplexed. "Where are you going, Mommy?" Roxanne had only said that because that was the first thing she could think of at that moment. Hence, she hadn't told Benny and Archie about it yet. Right then, all three kids were staring at her. Roxanne bit her lip and endured the heartbreak. "Once I'm done with my work here, I'll take you guys abroad. Unlike here, I think you guys are more accustomed to the lifestyle abroad. After all, that's where I raised you guys." Hearing that, Archie and Benny were briefly stunned. This is so sudden. However, there's not much difference. We've only come back to Chanaye this time around because we wanted to see what Daddy looks like. Not only have we seen him, but we've also found out he doesn't want us around. They were only reluctant to leave Chanaye because of Estella and Madeline. We can still keep in contact with Aunt Madeline after we leave the country. We can never look for Essie anymore, though. Archie and Benny looked at Estella, who was in Roxanne's embrace, longingly. Since Daddy is going to marry another woman, Mommy won't contact him anymore after we leave the country. Hence, we might never get to talk to Essie again. Archie and Benny were saddened by the fact that they would lose contact with Estella. Since I've already said so much, I should just say it as it is. Otherwise, Estella is going to end up crying once again in the future. Under their intense gazes, Roxanne frowned and toughened herself up when she said, "After this, I might not be able to see you again. However, you should know that I'll be missing you dearly. Be good, okay? Listen to your daddy and talk to him more often." Roxanne forced out a smile and glanced at Estella. "I won't be able to see Miss Jarvis ever again." Estella was too heartbroken to listen to what she was told. Knowing that Roxanne was leaving, she couldn't help but sob again. Roxanne smiled wryly and caressed Estella's head. "This could be the last time I see you, Essie. Don't cry anymore. Please smile more, okay?" Estella cried and shook her head. "Don't leave, Miss Jarvis." Roxanne let Estella cry for a while and comforted her when she got less emotional. "Get well soon, Essie. Once you're all grown up, you can come and visit me abroad." Deep down, Estella knew there was no way she could convince Roxanne to stay. Upon hearing her words, she grew hopeful. She then looked at Roxanne innocently and asked, "Really?" Roxanne smiled and nodded. Estella was still unconvinced. "But when I'm all grown up, will you still remember me, Miss Jarvis?" Roxanne shook her head firmly and answered, "Why wouldn't I? You're so cute, Essie. Why would I forget you?" Archie and Benny quickly chimed in, "We'll remember you as well, Essie. Get well soon, okay?" After getting her assurances, Estella went quiet for a while before nodding and wiping the tears off of her cheeks. "I'll stop crying now. Since this is going to be the last time Miss Jarvis sees me, I must leave a good impression. I don't want her to only remember me crying." At that thought, Estella tried her best to smile. Seeing that, Roxanne breathed a sigh of relief. Although she was heartbroken, she put on a straight face and said, "Let's play Lego, okay? After that, I'll send you home." The kids nodded obediently. Knowing that they were about to leave each other, Archie and Benny were very attentive to Estella. They stacked their Lego bricks slowly and focused on Estella's hands. Every time she needed something, they would attend to her and help her. Estella, on the other hand, was rather absent-minded, and she kept checking the time. By 4 in the afternoon, Roxanne glanced at the kids, steeled herself, and uttered, "It's about time I send you back, Essie." Hearing that, the kids quickly put the Lego bricks aside. Although Estella was still smiling at Roxanne, she was utterly saddened. Consequently, the smile on her face was stiff. Roxanne sighed inwardly and blamed herself for being so heartless. "She's still so little. I should be nice to her, but she's still Lucian's kid." Archie and Benny got up and hugged Estella with heavy hearts. "We'll still see each other at the kindergarten. Wait for us, okay?" Estella's eyes lit up and she nodded fervently. Roxanne got up and held Estella's hand before bringing her out of the house. While they were on their way to the Farwell residence, Roxanne kept mum because she was overwhelmed by mixed feelings. Estella was sitting at the back of the car and didn't talk much as well. Once she had stopped the car outside the Farwell residence, Estella asked cautiously, "Ms. Jarvis, are you leaving the country because of Daddy?" In response, Roxanne froze for a few seconds. She then smiled calmly at Estella and said, "No. I came back for work purposes, so I have to leave after I'm done with the work." Estella merely kept quiet after hearing her answer. Roxanne opened the car door and carried Estella out of the car before leading her toward the manor by her hand. Roxanne then let go of her hand to let Estella enter the manor. Right then, Estella raised her gaze and looked at Roxanne solemnly. When their gazes met, Roxanne's heart softened. She squatted down and looked into Estella's eyes. "Is there something you would like to tell me, Essie? I wonder why Ms. Jarvis hates Daddy so much that she would chase Daddy away every time she sees him. However, I can tell that Daddy has good intentions for Ms. Jarvis. Since Daddy likes Ms. Jarvis, I hope Ms. Jarvis would stop hating Daddy." Estella nodded slightly and uttered in a cute tone, "Ms. Jarvis, don't hate Daddy." Thinking that she could be seeing Estella for the last time, Roxanne nodded. Estella gave Roxanne a hug with a heavy heart before going into the manor. Roxanne didn't dare to go in because she was worried that Lucian and the maids would see her. Hence, she could only watch Estella leave before going back into her car. At that moment, Catalina was preparing for dinner in the manor. That was when she suddenly heard the doorbell ring. She immediately went to open the door and saw Estella at the door on her own. Shocked, she checked the surroundings, but she didn't see another soul. "Miss Estella, you should still be at the kindergarten, no? Why have you come back alone? Who sent you back?" Catalina asked worriedly before bringing Estella in. She then checked the surroundings once more. Estella was only forcing herself to smile in front of Roxanne. Since they had parted ways, her mood turned sour again. In response to Catalina's questions, she shook her head absent-mindedly before heading upstairs. Seeing that, Catalina grew concerned. After mulling over it for a while, she decided to call Lucian. Meanwhile, Roxanne felt conflicted after she got into her car. After sitting in a daze for a while in her car, Roxanne started her car and drove back. Back home, Archie and Benny were sitting on the couch, waiting for her to reach home. Upon seeing her, they rushed up to her worriedly. "Mommy, is Essie home already?" At the mention of Estella, Roxanne smiled bitterly and nodded at Archie and Benny. "Did Essie cry again in the car? She seemed so sad just now," Benny questioned. Roxanne caressed his head and answered, "No, she didn't. She was very well behaved." Hearing that, Benny and Archie nodded. However, they were still staring fixedly at Roxanne. Roxanne was startled by their intense gazes. With a frown, she asked, "What's wrong? Mommy, must we leave and stay abroad?" Benny stared at Roxanne in puzzlement. Prior to that, they didn't know they were going to settle down in a foreign country. They thought they were going to stay in Chanaye for good. Why would Mommy suddenly suggest something like that? There must be a reason behind it. Could the reason be Daddy? Roxanne nodded gently in response. Initially, she planned to settle down in Chanaye with Archie and Benny. However, she didn't expect to bump into Lucian again after returning to the country. Besides, she noticed the dramatic change of attitude Lucian had toward her. "Because of him, my life is a mess now. I must get away from him so that I can protect Archie and Benny." Meanwhile, at the Farwell residence, Lucian immediately stopped working after getting the call from Catalina. He rushed home from the office and called James on the way. Ever since the abduction incident, Estella had suffered from mental instability and they had to pay extra attention to her. Catalina stepped forward as soon as she noticed the two of them stepped inside the house. "Where is Essie?" Lucian furrowed his brows and eyed the living room. There was no sign of the little girl anywhere. Catalina pointed upstairs and said she went up to her own room after coming back and she didn't seem like she was in a good mood. No matter what I said, she just paid no heed to me. I didn't know what else to do but to get you back home. Lucian nodded solemnly and brought James upstairs. Estella's room was locked and it was eerily quiet. Lucian's heart sank. He knocked on the door gently and said, "Essie, it's Daddy. Could you open the door and let me in?" No sound was heard coming from the inside of the room. Estelle did not seem to have any intention of opening the door either. Lucian turned around to look at James. He was not actually worried about Estella coming home alone. Her brooding, however, was something he was worried about. Lucian was concerned that Estella would lock herself up like last time. Likewise, James was worried about the little girl. He had been Estella's psychologist for many years. Even though her condition had not improved over the years, it was still a rare condition, especially considering her age. The two of them hesitated for some time. Lucian ordered Catalina in a low voice, "Go take the keys." Just when Catalina was about to go fetch the keys, Estella opened the door. The three adults heaved a sigh of relief. "What happened? Why did you come back alone?" Lucian leaned forward and eyed the little girl. Estella seemed upset and shook her head. It was apparent that she did not wish to talk about it. Seeing that Estella was at least somewhat responsive to his question, Lucian was relieved. He patted her on her head and said, "It's all right if you don't want to say it. Just take a good rest. I'll call you when it's time for dinner later." Estella nodded meekly. When she went inside, Lucian ordered in a low voice, "Don't lock the door anymore." Estella agreed. She closed the door and Lucian brought James to his study. "What do you think about Essie's current condition?" They sat opposite each other in the study. James had been observing Estella and did not notice any changes in her. He nodded and said, "Same old, same old. Perhaps only some people could make her condition better." Of course, Lucian was well aware of who he was referring to. "I would suggest for her to get in touch with Miss Jarvis more often. Estella might just recover after some time," James commented. He noticed that Lucian's face grew solemn. Puzzled, he asked, "Why? Is it not feasible?" Lucian pinched between his brows and said, "I'm afraid that is not likely at the moment." Of course, Lucian knew that Estella would get better with Roxanne by her side. However, Roxanne was not particularly fond of him. Lucian reckoned that it would be almost impossible for her to agree to Estella staying with her. James was saddened by the news. "Well, you will be Estella's best hope then. You have to pay more attention to her condition. Anyhow, you may contact me for anything. Nothing has changed in that regard." Lucian nodded solemnly. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.